Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings, welcome back. Growing up or being of age in the 70s, there was a certain level of excitement. You had, in the early 70s, you had the animated Star Trek for 2 seasons. Then a few years go by, and you have a variety of other movies and television shows, whether it's Logan's Run or efforts to revitalize Star Trek. What you end up having, though, is a rush, an infusion. I don't remember the exact dates that these movies and whatnot came out, but you had Star Wars, you had Blade Runner, you had Alien, you had, of course, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's been said that Star Trek isn't science fiction, that it's horror, as in nightmare in space. And if you rewatch some of the old episodes and even some of the next generation episodes, it comes across as that. You've got giant space hands, you have to the death combat, you have being abducted in transport and sent somewhere else for combat. You have creatures that shapeshift after they've ended the host or the original. You have space clouds that act vampiric. Um, and then you have the motion picture, which for a lot of people is the least favorite of the entire series. Is It's almost as if it's I don't know. I've heard a lot of comparisons that it's Star Trek's version of 2001's A Space Odyssey. Um, it's it gets a lot of praise for its originality, and that's where I have to differ. When I went and saw it, I was excited. I'd seen the commercials on television. I'd gone to McDonald's and gotten the Happy Meal. I remember, you know, images of Klingons on the cardboard box of the Happy Meal, and uh, what is it, a tricorder or communicator that you could put together. But what I do remember is having seen the movie and being very disappointed because the promos for the movie said, "See how they live." Well, they didn't really go into that, but that's the priority of a kid's mind. Anyway, the motion picture, as I may have said already, it gets a lot of praise for being original. I disagree. It isn't original. It is a remake of the original series, The Changeling. The Changeling, the Changeling was the second season, third episode, I think. At least that's what is listed on my notes. That features Nomad, a probe thought lost, being repaired and originating from Earth. You can't really see it in the screenshot here, but this is if I'm not mistaken, the briefing room, and Kirk and Spock are asking it off to the side information, and V or not V'ger, Nomad wants to know about their origination, and they show just the static solar system. Nomad identifies Earth as being its origination, and if you remember from the motion picture, Voyager is on its on a direct path to Earth from wherever it had been resurrected or repaired, whatever you want to call it, amassing all the knowledge and whatnot. And but the similarities don't end there. But again, going back to it, Nomad knows it comes from Earth and recognizes that Captain Kirk has a similarity in a name and mistakes him for its creator. Voyager also is on a mission to Earth to reunite with its creator. As I alluded to, the similarities between the two constructed probes being the same storyline doesn't end there. In this scene, Nomad goes from another part of the ship after it had been brought aboard and hears Uhura singing and doesn't recognize what it is that she's doing. Proceeds to the bridge, locates her, and essentially reads her mind and discovers, well, you can make your jokes about the feminine mind being a you know a, an ocean of chaos and conflicting emotions, but that's essentially what Nomad states. It wipes her mind because of all that chaos. So you've got Nomad on the right, and you've got the Voyager energy probe on the left going through the science console. But they both end up attacking on the right, Mr. Scott, and then on the left, Mr. Spock. And you've got Decker in the background. Uh, could have sworn there was a scene where it attacked Chekov, that he got injured, and McCoy had to show up to fix his arm. And later in the Changeling episode, McCoy shows up to treat Scott and Uhura, only to find out that Nomad had ended Mr. Scott, but then resurrects him. And a departure from the actual similarity is that, unlike Nomad, who was able to resurrect Mr. Scott, Nomad wasn't able to restore Uhura's knowledge. She had to be re educated. And I always found this fascinating that from that episode forward, there was no explanation on screen as to how long it took. And there was no, I mean, it was the 60s, so they didn't do serialized all that much. It didn't happen too much. But it always bothered me that there was no follow up to show that she was having to progress, that she had to relearn, re earn that position. But here you've got the Voyager energy probe digitizing Ilia. Um, and off screen, you have Spock knocked down again, after having been attacked. So the permanence, this is, this is where it's the horror in space, the nightmare in space. You don't know what you're going to come across, and you don't know that, whether you're going to make it back and whether you're going to be worse the wear. More, and this is where it is similar to the Odyssey, the Greek tragedy of Odysseus and his crew, spending 10 years facing peril at every shore and every crested wave. Is that, are we going to make it back? What tragedies are going to come across us along the way? And this is one such example. So in here you have Nomad doing the same thing, and these weren't the first two of the red shirts. The other red shirts previously, similar fate when it left the holding cell, um, and hence the joke, the red shirt. Well, we know which one's not going to be around for the next episode. So it was Nightmare in Space, and whether it was Alien, whether it was Star Trek, it doesn't matter. It's just the whole idea of nightmare in space. And, and then it goes back to, as I was saying, you didn't know whether or not you or anyone you were with were going to make it out. We're going to make it successfully through that mission. But returning to the idea that the motion picture, a decade later, was essentially a remake of the season 2 episode, The Changeling, the one about Nomad, is this scene right here. I wanted to get the scene, but it would be of Spock from behind in a spacesuit doing the mind meld with the Ruby on the digitized Ilia, in addition to doing the mind meld with Nomad. So I went with this image where it shows him being having all the images flashing through his mind rapidly. And if you've seen the movie, you recognize the scene. But this is the similarities that I wanted to draw about. That you had an earthbound or an Earth originated probe desiring to return to Earth, referring to the Enterprise as being infested by organic beings, carbon based life forms, whatever you want to call them. Uh, Spock mind melding with a machine and mistake, as I said, wanting to return to Earth to unite with its creator. In the process, as Voyager gobbles up knowledge, it digitizes um, everything along its path. Remember the space station at the beginning? In addition to the Klingon ships that got digitized, there was the space station with the astronaut outside. And I always felt bad for that astronaut. The entire space station got digitized, and that astronaut was lost in space if they weren't already digitized also. It, the way they filmed it made it look as if that solo astronaut was supposed to perish alone in the deep darkness of space. And that always bothered me. It didn't sit well with me. Then Nomad, after rewatching the episode last week, it did the same thing. I wanted it to tie in the episode about the Doomsday machine with Commodore Decker and say that the motion picture was a remake of both of those episodes combined because it was a planet destroyer. But Nomad had destroyed plenty of planets on its own. So, and it launched its own little uh, energy ball weapon similar to Voyager. But I decided not to do it for overkill with Doomsday because really, the big similarity is both of the motion picture and that episode having a Decker and involved. So I'm sure there's points that I've missed, and either reinforcing my suggestion that the motion picture was not original; it was a remake of The Changeling, and I'm certain that there's probably differences enough that somebody would be wanting to say, "Nope, you're wrong. It's original because of," and I'm willing to read those. Let me know what you think. Have yourself a great day.